They tried to bankrupt me with a $250,000 fine, and the week after that a man I'd never met stood in my driveway with a gun and told me to shut up and stop rocking the boat. That's not how I pictured retiring, fixing up the place, putting in a garden, maybe building a little pond so birds would come back, but that's what happened in Ridgefield Hollow, and I still wake up thinking about it. My name is Jack Mercer, and if you want to know how a neighborhood can turn on one of its own, sit back for a minute, because this is the whole messy thing. From the first proud screw, I turned to the moment the truth blew up on a rainy Tuesday. We'd lived in Ridgefield Hollow 12 years. Quiet streets, cul-de-sacs, barbecues that stretched into the night, the kind of place where you learn everyone's dog's name. Every time it rained hard, the same houses flooded. Basements filled, lawns became little lakes, and insurance companies started asking questions. I used to be an engineer, small projects, nothing fancy, but the problem kept gnawing at me. So one spring I drew up a plan, a modest retention system on my property that tied into the neighborhood's drainage. Simple math, a few permits, a lot of sweat. It worked. The next heavy rain came and half the block stayed dry. People clapped. Kids splashed in puddles on the other end of the street. For a month, maybe two, I was the neighborhood hero. Then the letter came, thick paper, embossed seal. The board said my system violated HOA codes and endangered the community, and the fine was astronomical. $250,000. There was no negotiation, not at first. Marianne Shaw, our HOA president, who ran meetings like she was auditioning for a court of law, calm, precise, practice, signed it. She told people at a gathering that I'd undermined community safety and that something had to be done for the integrity of the neighborhood. It sounded official, and a lot of folks nodded. I remember looking at that number and thinking, this isn't about pipes or valves anymore. This is about power. The middle act of this mess is where things got ugly, and what I want you to feel is how slow, patient, and poisonous manipulations can be. Marianne had a way of controlling the room, but she also had friends who liked rules. She started bringing in experts, men in badges and ties who said things like code violation and immediate remediation. They pointed at my plans, at the angles of the runoff, at stuff I'd double-checked 3 times. Then small things escalated. A sprinkler head cut, a meter knocked loose in the night, threatening notes left on my porch. At first I thought it was kids or vandals, until I found footprints that didn't match ours and a security camera pixel that showed a truck I'd never seen. There's a moment you learn about people, the one where a person either steps up or walks away. Mine came in the kitchen over coffee with Rosa Kim, who worked in the HOA office and had one of those soft voices that hides sharp things. Rosa slid a thumb drive across the table like it was nothing and said, "You need to see this before it's gone." On it were emails, bank transfers, a grainy video of Marianne having a late-night conversation with a contractor who later showed up at my property the day we started fixing stuff. It didn't prove everything, but it proved enough that someone with a conscience had started to look at the machinery behind the scenes. Here's where I made a mistake. I tried to fix it with logic. I sent copies of permits, engineering specs, even the maintenance plan showing the neighborhood's safety improved. I went to community meetings and spoke steady. Used the words people respected, compliance, remediation, benefit, cost. Marianne smiled and rewrote the narrative. Suddenly, I was a rogue operator, someone who went around the rules for personal gain. The thing about narratives is they don't need to be true to be convincing, they just need to be rehearsed. And then the night a man pushed his way into my property, that rehearsal turned into threat. I was fixing a valve under a tarp, the radio low, when a truck pulled up and 2 men in rain jackets got out. One put his hand through the fence and said, without introduction, "You stop this now, or you'll regret it." He had a bulge under his jacket that told you everything you needed to know. I remember the rain on my face, the smell of wet earth, and thinking not logically, not with plans, but really feeling that this was more than a fine. It was a test of how far someone would go to keep power. What followed was an escalation in the public theater. Marianne called a special meeting and had a slideshow, and I watched friends and neighbors, people who'd sat on porches and shared lemonade, look at the slide deck and choose a side. Some people clung to Marianne's calm competence, others to the idea that you don't mess with a rulebook. I lost a couple of friends who said, politely, that this was a legal matter and they couldn't get involved. You learn the shape of true loyalty when the costs show up. But here's the part that turned everything. Rosa had been recording. Not in the vague, cinematic way you see in movies, but with careful, frightened taps of her phone. She slipped me a file of a phone call not public, not polished, where Marianne is unusually blunt. "Make him stop," she said, "or make him pay." There was laughter in the background, the sound of paper, and then a transfer of an amount that matched a contractor's account. It wasn't a smoking gun in court terms, but in town terms it was flamethrower stuff. We had to be careful. Exposed too soon, and they'd bury us with legal fees. Wait too long, and they'd scramble evidence. So we made a plan the only way small people make plans, quietly, imperfectly, with coffee and nerves. Rosa would leak the email thread to a local reporter who still cared about small fights for big reasons. I set up a few extra cameras, small, cheap, ordinary, and asked a neighbor who ran the hardware store to keep an eye on the crew that kept showing up for inspections. The days until the storm were the slowest kind of suspense. You notice every small sound, every truck that lingers. Then the storm hit. Nothing cinematic in the Hollywood sense, just a Wednesday with more rain than the town had seen in years. In the middle of it, the HOA somehow ordered work crews to disable a portion of the retention system, claiming emergency remediation. You can guess how that looks in daylight. Men with tools loosening bolts, drainage redirected, a steady seep turning into a rush. Houses flooded. Basements we'd all sworn were safe filled. People were shouting, hauling boxes, grabbing pictures, and for the first time the cost of the board's gestures, the price of following procedure, was visible and personal. Rosa's leak and the reporter's piece landed 2 days after the flood. The story ran with the emails, with video stills from our little cameras, with interviews of homeowners who had nothing to gain but their ruined things. The internet didn't explode the way some imagine it does. This was Ridgefield Hollow, but the right people started asking questions. County officials asked for files, and the HOA's polish started to scuff. Marianne called me, not in a meeting but on my phone, and said in a tone I'll never forget, "You started something you can't finish, Jack." I told her, quietly, that nobody asked to be a hero, but sometimes you're the only one who will stand there when the water comes. The fallout was messy and not exactly cinematic. There were town meetings that turned into shouting matches, an internal audit that found procedural lapses, and an attorney's letter or 3 flying back and forth. Marianne stepped down eventually, not in a big resignation with fireworks, but in a small, papered way that let her keep a lot of dignity while losing the platform. Some contractors were investigated. Rosa left the HOA office and got a job in the county, and when she left she hugged me like someone who'd been carrying a weight for years. The legal end? Complicated, slow, full of filings and fees, and the kind of bureaucratic language lawyers like. I ended up with a settlement that didn't make me rich, but paid for repairs and my sanity. What stayed with me wasn't the court dates or the checks, it was the way people's faces changed when their world flooded. Some neighbors who'd been quick to sign petitions came by with boxes of clothes and asked, quiet, "Are you okay?" Others avoided me like I was contagious. I learned how fragile small communities are when fear gets loose, and how easy it is for a few people with confidence and talking points to steer a crowd. If I could compress the lesson of Ridgefield Hollow, it would be this: rules matter, but so do motives. A rule book in the hands of someone who refuses to be questioned becomes a tool. Our little victories saved houses, but the fight reminded me that community is a thing that requires work, not just on lawns and drains, but on trust. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone thinking of standing up, it's to find the people with conscience, not grand gestures, just the ones who will hand you a thumb drive and say, quietly, do what's right. If you've been in a fight like this with a board, with a neighbor, with any system that favors the same voices, I want to hear about it. Was the board right? Was the homeowner a vigilante? Where does justice begin, and who gets to decide? Drop a comment with what you think, share if this struck a chord, and if you're on the fence, tell us what would make you take a side. The truth is messy, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. I just know what it felt like to stand in the rain and hold a plan in my hands, and decide that being right on paper wasn't enough.